Hi everyone, I'm Chika Odor. You're watching Sahara TV. Right now we're going to go into our country focus segment, and for today we're focusing on the nation of South Sudan. It is the youngest country in Africa. On July 9, 2011, South Sudan gained its independence from the nation of Sudan, and this was the agreement that was brokered by a 2005 peace deal which ended the longest civil war in the history of Africa. So right now we have two very distinguished guests with us to talk about the future of South Sudan and its relations with its northern neighbor Sudan. I have Mr. Christopher Zambakari. He is a Sudanese American and he immigrated to the United States in 2001. In 2006, he obtained his bachelor's degree of science in psychology from Arizona State University. He worked as a social change advocate. Chris also contributed to bringing awareness to problems in South Sudan and Sudan. Also, he worked with the Southern Sudanese Women Empowerment Network to bring awareness to the women's cause and fundraising for the organization. In 2009, Mr. Zambakari received an MBA in International Finance from the University of Buckingham in England. And now I want to introduce our second guest, that's Dr. Ali-Dinar. He is a native of the Darfur region in Sudan, and he's also the grandson of the last king of Darfur. Very interesting. He received his MA and BA from the University of Khartoum in Sudan, and he received a PhD from the University of Pennsylvania. Currently, he's a professor and the assistant director in the African Studies program at UPenn. Thank you so much, gentlemen, for joining us on Sahara TV today.
Thank you.
I just want to start with some background on the situation happening right now in Sudan. So, Christopher, if you can give us and shed us some light on the current government crackdowns and all the protests that we're seeing in the media happening in Sudan.
Well, a couple of weeks ago, the government in northern Sudan, due to the oil shutdown and the confrontation with South Sudan, which with the comprehensive peace agreement seceded in 2011, and took with it 75 to 80% of the oil field in Sudan. And this basically put a huge strain on the economy in northern Sudan. And the government has put in place, actually both governments have put in place some austerity measures, and they've been cutting and trimming the budget at a very high rate. And what ended up happening is a higher inflation in northern Sudan, and the instability that was already brewing underground, and sort of putting that all together in a very volatile political system. Sudan has always had this tradition of protest. So the students, the workers, those that are unemployed, young people, they sort of took to the street to sort of boycott this austerity measure because they were already worse off before the austerity measures. And then with the government new implemented policy, it just put a lot of people out of business and put a lot of strain on the economy.
Right.
So it's sort of a chain reaction sort of built on since South Sudan sort of split in 2011.
Mm-hmm. And Dr. Ali-Dinar, do you think that some of these austerity measures that are being implemented by Sudan, do you think it's arising from the fact that the split happened and now Sudan has to find a way to generate revenue?
Yeah, I mean, it is part of that, but the main part is that has to do with policies in Sudan, and that has to do with corruption in Sudan, because the oil money is supposed not to be all watered down like this in a very short time. But that is part of the what the regime was just doing all these years with the oil revenues, which was not translated into any kind of development in the country, which is not the money which was well used and saved for these generations and generations to come. This is a kind of a result that the government, before the oil, it has other cash producing projects, and it just ignored all these projects and relied heavily on oil. And the revenue is oil is not for the well sake of Sudanese, but for the regime and the people who are associated with it. And all that money is gone now. So these austerity measures is not like as a result of the oil in the south is no longer there, but also it is indicative of how the oil money, which has been accumulated all these years, were just being misused.
Right, by the government. And this is the same government that is being led by President Omar al-Bashir. Dr. Ali-Dinar, we all know that Bashir is being, he's wanted for war crimes by the ICC. Why hasn't he been arrested thus far? Why is he just a free man? He seems like he's free to roam around Africa. What do you think is going on here?
It's not like people don't, people love him to the extent that they do not want to hand him down. But that is the result of the ICC itself doesn't have a mechanism of hijacking or taking individuals by whatever means to be prosecuted at The Hague.
Right.
There are other countries which signed that they will just abide when someone is being wanted by the ICC will be handed over, but that never happened.
Right.
And that is something has to be addressed by the United Nations Security Council. What its position would be towards countries which fail to honor the call of the court.
I just also want to now talk about the relationship between the governments of Sudan and South Sudan, not just the governments, but also the people. So, Mr. Zambakari, can you give us a sense of the general scope, if there is one, the general perspective on relationships between the people of Sudan and South Sudan?
Well, let's begin with the most basic thing. You had Sudan, which was one country up until 2011. And then you have this political divorce, which took place. And then it sort of divided people along sort of arbitrary line. You have family that were in the north and spread out throughout Sudan. So those relationships, what I call the Sudanese fabric, it's still in place. Regardless of the division in Sudan, regardless of the political remapping of the two countries, you have this relationship that has been forged over centuries. So I have relatives in northern Sudan. I even have relatives who live in the western part of Sudan.
But you consider yourself a southern Sudanese, right?
But I was born in southern Sudan, and I consider myself to be South Sudanese. But that doesn't change the fact that I have relatives. I have an older brother, for example, who went to seminary in Khartoum. So you have the relationship that is in place. And then above that, you have the politics. So the politics make things a bit more complicated than what we have. Rather than having sort of this amicable relationship between the two regions, that used to be one, and then now you have two countries, the politics have sort of spoiled this relationship and created this bitterness between the two regions. Assuming also that you have to put that in the framework of this long civil war that took place, and something that we should have been doing is basically building trust between the two, but politics is always ever present, and it's making things a little bit trickier. And with the government in northern Sudan constantly threatening and shutting down, closing down the border, and making things more complicated than they should be.
So, Dr. Ali-Dinar, how does the Darfur region fit into this whole scheme of things? It is in the western part of Sudan, so the people who make up the Darfur region, are they going down to South Sudan? Are they staying in their current locations in Darfur? What's happening there?
They are staying there. I mean, they are staying there, but again, they are not like safe in staying there. And the case in Darfur is not like only Darfur, which is now boiling, but there are other regions in Sudan also having the same fate. Places like in Nuba Mountains, places in the Blue Nile, the southern part of the Blue Nile. All these places are now experiencing violence from the government, a war of attrition against civilians. The same kind of policies which were being adopted against civilians in South Sudan are now being implemented in Darfur. They are being implemented in South Kordofan, in the Blue Nile. So all these places are just boiling and for the same issue, for the same issue of inclusion and for the same issues of recognition that they are part of the Sudan. And when they are saying that like they're part of the Sudan, they want to enjoy all the benefits in which other people or other places in Sudan they are enjoying.
Okay. And Doctor, you are the grandson of the last king of Darfur. So do you play a role in the culture of the region?
That was a long time ago. I mean, my grandfather, he was the last, yes, he was the last sultan who was being killed by the British in 1916. But what we see, like in Sudan, in all these places in which are now witnessing violence, is that you will find like armed groups, which people in situation in which people and groups took to arms and start fighting the government. I'm not part of these movements, but at the same time also I'm just doing my own share of alerting people and just being also positive in exposing the government and working with other entities to bring peace by methods which we are tuned in doing.
Okay. And Doctor, for so many years, actually for decades, we in the Western world saw so many depictions of the war-torn Darfur region. We saw children with the swollen bellies, signs of malnourishment. We saw death and destruction in the Darfur region, not just on TV, but in magazines and newspapers, websites, constantly. So do you think that this is still the reality of Darfur today? Is there still a sense of grief and oppression in the Darfur region?
Yeah, I mean that is what is happening, because if the situation is good, you will not find people still like now in refugee camps. You will not find people in internally displaced camp, because like no one is happy in living in a camp and they're receiving relief from foreign agents, and at the same time also has the opportunity to go to his own village and resume his life. But this is not the case. This is the case here. It's not like it is impossible for those people to go back because the situation is not secure. And so this is the situation. And with that, like since the situation is not secure, people living their livelihood to a great extent based on what the relief agencies are providing them. So images in which people are hungry or malnourished is a direct result of this kind of policies, which is just being enforced on these people.
Right. And I just want to bring Christopher into the conversation. On TV, in the media, we noticed that most of the residents in the Darfur region are of darker complexion, maybe the Dinka tribe, the Yoruba tribes. So also in South Sudan, again, it's the same demographic. And a lot of people say that much of the tension in the region is simply a color issue. It's an ethnic issue of Arabs against Black Africans. Do you think this is still the case today? And if so, why are so many Sudanese people denying that this is what the problem is?
Well, let's put things a bit in perspective. It was never just a color issue. Color played a role, race played a role, ethnicity played a role. So did politics, power, and the legacy of slavery and the institutional legacy of colonialism. So all these things sort of have, you have to put them in the background, because you cannot just say it's this one issue. But the oversimplification of the conflict in Sudan as it's an ethnic conflict, it's a religious conflict, it's a racial conflict, that is an overly simplistic description of the conflict that has been rejected by key scholars on Sudan itself. The issues of Sudan, if you're looking at the whole of, you can always look at what, and sort of, there's similarities and there are distinctions. But if you're looking at the problems of Sudan, You know, you have to look at the legacy that slavery has left in the country, and you have to look at the legacy that colonialism left, and you have to look at the failure in the post-colonial period to build a nation out of diversity. So these are the bigger blocks.
So Christopher, what about the mass rapings that we heard about being committed by the Janjaweed at the instruction of Bashir? Was this an attempt, some people say, some experts say, this is an attempt to whitewash the gene pool?
Well, I'm just going to restrict my comment, and I'll defer to Dr. Ali, because he's an expert.
Sure. Dr. Ali, I'm asking about the mass rapings. Many experts say that this was an attempt to whitewash the gene pool in the region. Do you have any comments?
Dr. Ali?
Okay. No, I mean, that is not, I completely agree with Chrissy that, like, to make it a racial conflict is complete reduction, specifically like in the case of Darfur. This is a political conflict. I think you have just to put it in perspective. At the time in which the government tried to racialize the conflict and putting it in this frame.
Who tried to do that? That is the fault of which government? The U.S. government or
No. The government of Sudan. When I say the government, okay. I mean the government of Sudan.
So they wanted to make it seem like a color issue. Is that what you're saying?
No, because like here, if it is a color issue, I am from Darfur, and Chris is from the south, and Chris is in the, like, if you follow that kind of analogy, he is from the south, so he's an African. If you want to follow that. So he's supposed to be darker than me. And I am from the Darfur, which is being regarded as the north.
Right, and it's the complete opposite.
You could just see the difference, who is from the south and who is from the north.
Right.
So this kind of imagery, I think, like, this is exactly what you will see in Darfur. And this is exactly how the witch is just being conducted. It is when we think about the issue of the Janjaweed, this is something which is just being created by the government to conduct the war, not like in political terms, but in racial and ethnic terms.
Okay.
And that is how it tends to side with specific groups creating ethnically based militias to fight the insurgency.
And I just want to briefly...
It is not just in Darfur, but also in South Sudan.
Okay.
The policy of creating ethnically based militias also goes all the way into the south. And the government of Sudan, if you could just say, it has its own Janjaweed of people like from Arab groups in Darfur. It has its own Janjaweed also in the south. But the Janjaweed of the south, they are not Arabs. You will find them also groups which are ethnically based or defined in what you call them African.
That's interesting. I just want to change the topic a little bit. Dr. Ali-Dinar, what do you think about celebrity activism? We've seen the likes of George Clooney making his case for Americans to get more involved in stopping the torture that's happening in Darfur. Do you think that these Western celebrities are helping to address the issue, or are they harming? Are they also the cause of this oversimplification of these complex issues?
I think I don't mind whoever is a celebrity to come and talk about the issue, and I think that brief of time for them in the news is not a time which allow deep understanding of the conflict. So I think like they bring a lot of attention and a lot of concern to the issue, which without them, and then this is also our reality here, there would be maybe very few people will just tear to this conflict. And the bottom line here for me is that, like, whether they are speaking the truth or whether they are not speaking the truth, whether there are real atrocities, there are real tragedy happening in this part of the world, whether it's in Sudan or whether in Blue Nile or in South Kordofan, or whether these are just things which been imagined by them and they are not telling the truth. And I think like they are telling the truth. And then this is a way in which people could turn and do activism around this cause.
Interesting. I have to stop you there and just go back to Chris.
their
have to go back to Chris
responsibility.
now. Chris, what do you think about corruption in South Sudan? Of course, we heard that more than $4 million was misappropriated in the state treasury. So do you think South Sudan will now go the way of so many African corruption-riddled countries?
Well, I've said time and again that South Sudan is not immune from some of the issues plaguing its neighboring countries. And obviously corruption is a big problem. And you're right. In her address to the UN several months ago, the head of the United Nations mission in South Sudan, Hilda, she actually reported that $2 billion had been missing from the treasury in South Sudan, money that was given to help build the country. And the system in South Sudan has not been completely set up. In other words, I'm talking about the public finance system. You know, the system is still being developed. In other words, when you have that sort of setup, you're always going to find that people are willing and able to take advantage of that system or lack thereof.
Okay.
So and as South Sudan put itself in order, you have this thing that's happened last time. Until the mechanism has been set up, has been put in place, and accountability, built into these institutions, it's going to be very difficult to track, because one of the things that we find in South Sudan is that nobody knows where the money went, and yet money left, but you cannot trace it. You can identify who was responsible for the money. All we know is that money is missing. So part of it is it's just the lack of institution, the lack of mechanism that can be put in place, or that is still being put in place, to hold people accountable, to hold leaders accountable, to their people. That system is still being developed, and corruption is a direct result of the lack of institution currently in place.
Okay. Gentlemen, we have less than 1 minute. I just want to get your rounding statements. Mr. Zambakari, can you give us maybe your vision for South Sudan in the next 5 years? And do you see currently, is there a base of youth activists on ground in South Sudan who can maybe advocate for progress in the future of its country?
Yes. What I would like to add is that, first of all, if you look at the demographic of South Sudan, South Sudan is one of the youngest country in the region. It's also one of the youngest country in the world. The average age, 72% of the population in South Sudan are under the age of 30. So it's a very young country. So we're a country full of youth, and part of the challenge currently in South Sudan is how are you going to integrate this youth? How are you going to develop the human capacity of this youth and integrate it into the nation and state building project in South Sudan? That's the first thing. And the second thing is the majority of the population in South Sudan happen to be women as well. And so long as you keep women away from politics, from economics, from decision making, you're marginalizing the bulk of the population, or a significant part of the population. So we've got to figure out a way to integrate these women and the youth into the nation and state building project in South Sudan.
Okay,
And
Dr. Ali-Dinar, I just have to cut you off there. I'm sorry. Dr. Ali-Dinar, what are your thoughts? I know that you're a native of Darfur, but for your brothers and sisters in South Sudan, what are your goals in the next 5 years? What do you hope to see will happen?
I hope I hope the issues which occurred and led to the ongoing conflict between the North and the South Sudan will be solved, and that peace and prosperity will be in the South. But at the same time, also, I hope real change would happen in the North, because without the North being in real path of history, I don't think the Southern Sudan also will enjoy that the joy of independence and the joy of security. And that will only attain if this regime, which now in power, and it has been there for 23 years, that it will disappear, and a real democratic regime in Sudan will come, based on the ashes of this regime and based on the accumulative experiences the Sudanese have gained, that they will put their country back on the right track, and all these problems would be solved. Thank you.
Well, on that note, gentlemen, I want to thank you so much, Mr. Zambakari and Dr. Ali-Dinar. We really appreciate your insights. I'm sure some of our viewers may have gotten some clarity on what's happening in Sudan, South Sudan, and the Darfur region. Thank you so much for joining us on Sahara TV.
Our pleasure.
All the best.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, everyone, that was two gentlemen who were speaking on the situation in South Sudan and in the whole region in general as South Sudan prepares to celebrate its 1 year of independence that comes up on Monday. So we had just spoken to Dr. Ali-Dinar. He is a professor at the University of Pennsylvania, and Mr. Christopher Zambakari. He's a young African development scholar.